everybody, and welcome to a special Thursday edition of our live show. Be sure and start lining up your comments and questions down there in the comment section. So let's just take it away with the big news of today, which was, actually, I guess not as newsy maybe as it could have been, and that is we finally know details on the Tesla Cybertruck.
Yeah, it was the delivery event. I think it was the first, I think it ended up being about 6 or so, and it was supposed to be 10. But we saw the truck, we saw its production form. They had folks climbing in, and off they went with their brand new Cybertrucks.
And I am curious about that because I haven't heard anything since then. But did you notice they didn't actually get to drive their Cybertruck? Someone drove them in their Cybertruck.
It's a valet service, you know?
So I am so full of so many questions without answers here. Let's go through what we do know, though. What is the base price?
It is significantly higher than we thought it would be. So it was supposed to start at $39,900 for that rear-wheel drive single motor model, and it's going to start out at $60,990.
Yeah, that is quite a bump. And for the record, that is about $10,000 more than a base model Ford Lightning. You do get 20 miles more range, but you actually go slower 0 to 60. And that base rear-wheel drive model is going to be rear-wheel drive, and the base Lightning is actually dual motor.
Yeah, I was going into this, and I went back and I rewatched the original event, and that's an archived event. It's 4 years old, and I was really excited at that time because those numbers were fantastic. I was expecting there to be an increase. It only makes sense. Not only has it been 4 years, but if you look at supply chains, you look at what other electric vehicles have done, especially the trucks, the Lightning, and famously the Silverado EV. And I told myself 45 to 50 is kind of that buffer zone where I said, this seems like a reasonable, understandable increase. They shot well past that.
Yeah, it was. It's quite surprising. I am actually pretty surprised by the range on these options as well. So let's go through that. So the base rear-wheel drive model is 250 miles of range. I'm going to go ahead and assume that that is probably using the same battery as the biggest battery available in Model S or Model X. That's probably about where it will be because we have a 95 kilowatt hour battery-ish in the 230 mile range Lightning. Then we get 340 miles in the all-wheel drive model, but that goes all the way up to $80,000 to get that.
Yep.
Then we have the Cyber Beast, where range drops understandably down a little bit for the tri-motor model. That's going to be basically $100,000. So $99,990 before destination, before your sales fee, because Tesla still charges those two, fees there. And then we have the mysterious range extender option, which could boost you up to 470 plus miles. Lots of questions on that one still, but by all indications, this is apparently going to be a bed-mounted battery bank that will obviously...
My first question
obviously eat into your payload.
Is how's it mounted?
Yes, it by all appearances, from the rumor mill at any rate that I have been able to dig up, is that it's going to be bed mounted. It's probably going to be several hundred pounds. There's no lightweight magic battery here, so it's going to be a permanent installation thing. And you'll have to give up cargo.
My first thought was, is it vertical or horizontal? My best guess is horizontal, but then what we're looking at is not only a cut into the bed itself, but is there limitations now to how much weight you can put on top of the battery pack itself? Some of those things to consider. And if we do that, it does have a Ridgeline style gear locker, I think is what they're calling it. And if you put that battery pack on there, you're losing a gear locker too.
Well, the battery pack, from all the rumor mills that exist now, no patent filings that was seen, etc., but it would be more or less toolbox shaped. So think sort of steel toolbox in the bed of a regular half-ton truck. So it would be between. It would eat up your cargo area and give you less length. So it would be just as deep as it normally is. It would be at the forward side of the bed mounted there. We don't know any details, of course, because we don't know how big it would need to be to add an extra 100 miles of range, but probably in the 30 to 40 kilowatt hour range at the very least. Obviously, you're adding weight, so that weight is actually going to drop your efficiency down. And we don't know any pricing on that option, of course.
what Elon did say via X was that it is going to take about a third of that cargo capacity. So it's a chunk, and like you said, it's going to cost more. It's going to weigh more. There are going to be some drawbacks, and again, the other piece he added was that it's really meant for long road trips or towing up a mountain, which makes sense. But the way he said it, it would only really be beneficial for those two like use cases if you're able to take it out and put it
Right.
in for those use cases. But that's not at all what I would expect.
No, it doesn't seem to
There's
be
too much
that way.
battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other question that has not been answered is how exactly is this range extender widget going to charge? Does it charge with the main battery pack? One would assume it would, but I'm just saying
Mhm.
it's not clear at this moment.
Yeah.
And
It wasn't
if
even
it's,
mentioned. We kind of had to look it
yeah,
up.
if the vehicle can just use it and it doesn't have the same cooling capacity as a regular battery pack, the vehicle could use it just sort of as a supplement, and it could slowly drain
Mhm.
the battery in a more even fashion, et cetera. Make sure the battery stays nice and cool, et cetera. So it could have lower cooling and heating requirements for that extra pack. But then you get into the questions of then is it going to charge as quickly? So if you need to fill it back up, how quickly can you fill it
Right.
up? All those are
Yeah.
unknown. We do know that this is going to be the fastest pickup truck in the world, though.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming in well under 3 seconds. And
Hmm.
I did go back and check. 2.9 was the original claim. We're coming in at 2.6. And that's obviously with
Hmm.
your calculated rollout, et cetera. But we're still talking about a massively powerful vehicle. They showed
Hmm.
it racing the Porsche 911 while towing the
Yeah.
911. Honestly, it's a great bit. And I get a kick out of it every time. So,
Yeah, they didn't say which 911 because there are a lot of them.
no,
So that's
I
one
would
thing.
assume not on the lower end, but it is still
Yeah.
a 911.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see exactly how that sorts out. 3.6 seconds, I think, was essential because otherwise the Rivian would have been the fastest truck in the world. It's at 3.8, so I think it was really critical that they, sorry, 2.8. So I was thinking it was really critical that they beat Rivian on that front.
Yeah.
845 horsepower in the big one, and it's going to weigh just about 7,000 pounds, so a little bit lighter than a Rivian.
Yeah, I mean, those obviously the horsepower is one of the big question numbers. I think you and I are both curious how heavy is it going to be, and it is coming in
Hmm.
under 7,000. That tri motor just topping over 6,800, but it is coming with 10,000, almost 300 foot pounds of torque. So it's going to be able to move.
Eh,
And as far
tricky,
as
tricky moment
well, of
there, though.
course,
Wheel
there's
torque. It's
calculations,
not
right?
wheel torque. It's
Right,
not actual motor torque. So this is not measured in the
right.
same way that anybody else other than Hummer is measuring torque.
Right. What we are looking at is a quick truck, and for what it is, it's relatively agile. I mean, I don't know what the market is on agile electric trucks, but it could have been heavier for sure.
Hmm. And every thought kept coming back to Hummer, to be perfectly honest, because the way that they're
Mhm.
describing this as being 17 inches of ground clearance, even though there were those rumors that it couldn't go up the same slope that a Lightning could go up, bear that in mind.
Mhm.
But the air suspension, the 17 inches of maximum clearance, the way they're describing torque, which is actually less than Hummer, by the way, so 11,500 pounds of wheel torque in the Hummer. Um, everything screams Hummer on that spec sheet, oddly enough.
Yeah, I price tag is less than, so there's
Hmm.
kind of a plus in that category if that's who
Unless
they're
you get the
competing
tri-motor
against.
model.
Right, but then it's more performance. There's
Hmm.
more to it. I think it's probably a little bit more usable as a truck than the Hummer as well. Just kind of the way the space is laid out. That's kind of the feel I get for it. But it priced itself out of the Lightning category. I think in a number of ways, it's going to be right in there with the Silverado EV. I
Yeah.
think as far as the pricing competitor, and they're very different trucks.
I'd say more Silverado EV because Lightning is definitely less expensive.
Yeah,
There is no such thing as $100,000 Lightning, and the $100,000 where the Cyber Beast is going to start. So
yeah.
colors, options, etc. on that's well over $100,000 there. Tesla is going to offer, most likely, we don't know all the details yet, most likely probably more than just one color interior like they do in the rest of the lineup. So I'd expect that to be an extra cost option. Obviously, the range extender is going to be an extra cost option. Enhanced autopilot, full self-driving, blah 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 blah. Those are all going to be add-on options. And then they are going to offer essentially colors, most likely in the wraps, but all these details around the edges, no firm answers at all on them. So we don't know if there will be wraps, what will they look like.
So right before we logged in, I took a look at the accessory website, and it is up and it is running, and it looks like it's about $6,500 to wrap your Cybertruck.
Okay, so they finally did announce pricing. Okay, so that, that's believable.
Yep, and then the big option is the tent, and that's coming in at just under $3,000. So the options are up. It's not numerous. I mean, as far as trucks go, the accessories are somewhat limited, but they've got some of the staple things in there.
Shan's World here says, I want to see the Cybertruck windshield wiper work at its fastest speed. I too want to see this magic happen. There's a reason that not too many cars have a single wiper blade, because you actually can't make them wipe as fast as multiple wiper blades because they're so large and they weigh so much. And that's definitely a problem there. Let's move through some of these other comments here, see what people are asking here, because there's a comment here about the 800-volt architecture. This is an interesting point. We do know they said it's an 800-volt architecture, but they also said it's only 250 kilowatts max charge speed, so not any faster charging than the existing trucks, existing Tesla lineup. One would assume that it could charge maybe a little bit longer, et cetera, in the bigger packs, but that does kind of make sense because this pack is related to the one in the Model S and Model X, just formatted differently for 800 volts. There's no reason it would charge any faster. Some of the questions that I have circling around that, though, have yet to be answered. So supercharger V3s don't support 800-volt EVs natively. So is this doing up conversion? It would make sense that it would. To up convert to 800 volts, that probably would limit the charging speed. But it also could mean that if that is the case and that's what they're doing, then once the V4 stations roll out, we'll actually get a different number, and maybe on V4 stations they'll charge faster. We just don't know.
Yeah, like you said, there were so many subjects that we were hoping would be covered. I saw some outlets saying all the info's coming, and I did not expect all of it. I was just hoping for more. The 48 volt for the rest of the system is a significant jump. I mean, it's one that was coming, but it's a step forward. The 800 volt, we'll see how it's integrated. I'm
less interested in the 48 volt systems in a weird sort of way, because I'm not clear how much weight it will actually save.
I mean, I think they said 70% less wiring, which is nice. But obviously,
that's not because of 48 volts. That's because of their highly integrated Ethernet stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of using CAN bus for onboard communications, they're using modified Ethernet. Logically, there should be a weight savings, but logically also a lot of wiring looms in modern cars that are running on 12 volts are already at like 18 gauge wire, 16 gauge wire. So they're already really quite small, and you're not really going to get that much smaller when you bump the voltage up. Window motors could be a little bit smaller. I think that might pick up some weight improvements, but you're always going to have a 12-volt bus on the vehicle. So to answer this particular question, I don't suspect this will be a problem, because there's going to be a 12-volt bus on the truck. It would not work with trailers if there wasn't. So if you have a trailer, the electricity supplied to the lights, the braking systems, constant power on like camper trailers where you have lights and things like that on the trailer, those are on a 12-volt bus. Whether it will be robust enough to jumpstart a 12-volt car, though, that is a different question. And then Bob, they also didn't mention cells, right?
No.
Yeah, so we don't know.
I was listening to I think Sandy Monroe talking about it, and he said that they're using dry cells in the Cybertruck, but that's I hadn't heard anyone else bring that up. So
yeah,
sure
lots of debate on that one. I don't think that I would assume that they're going to be substantially similar to what they're doing now. So probably the same cells, that are in the existing lineup would make the
Well, and
most
I think that's
sense.
part of the reason that one of the biggest numbers to have changed besides price is the range.
Hmm.
The Cyber Beast, the tri-motor as it was supposed to be, is coming in at 320 miles of range, which is not the 500 it was stated to begin with. And
Right.
I think that battery leap, because we're looking at technological generations here, and when it comes to the battery, I think this is the battery they were expecting to be in the Roadster to produce 600 miles and just push that much more power. I think we came
Hmm.
up short. I think that's why there is a range extender. Again, however that's implemented, I think it's because they didn't get the batteries
Hmm.
where they wanted them.
The range extender also is kind of an interesting twist because I would assume that the range extend well, obviously the range extender is going to be heavy. You're putting it in a
Yeah.
7,000-pound truck. That could help them stay within certain regulatory envelopes, depending on
Mhm.
exactly how that is integrated in the car, etc.
Yeah.
I'm going to be curious to see how the bed shapes up because that is one thing that we haven't seen a lot of coverage on. If you want to, this is going to be the only pickup truck in America with no spare tire. If you want a spare tire, you can get one. They strap it to the bed just behind the cab. So
Yeah.
it's going to occupy a reasonable amount of room. And I am surprised that they didn't try and stick it in the gear locker area or in the front trunk or something like that. Um,
Mounted up against that back window, some
yeah.
sort of.
The other thing also is the bed dimensions. It is 6 feet long and it's 4 feet wide, but that is considerably smaller actually than the average half-ton bed.
It is. Now, one thing that is different, I did get a look at some, I guess one of the first that had been delivered, that's already, had a walk around, and that bed has no intrusion from the wheel arches. So
Hmm.
essentially, they have up until that wheel arch, and that's where they start the bed. So it is
Right.
it is a very rectangular,
Yeah.
basin there.
And that
And
that is kind
that,
of the weird thing. So, like in a normal pickup truck, you can use the space over the wheel wells all the way to the edges of the vehicle practically. And in this, it's going to be, I don't know what that space is used for.
I don't know either. I think again, the earlier prototypes or the hope was that you'd have sort of a ram box style
Hmm.
cargo area up in the
Yeah.
wedge for the rest of the bed, but that I don't know.
Yeah, it is an interesting setup there with a lot of again unanswered questions. But there is a bit of precedence because if you remember the Tacoma that we were recently driving, its bed
Mhm,
actually is notably narrower than some other mid-sized truck beds because of its composite design and that desire to have really
mhm.
really straight sides. So they also lose a bit of that extra space that would normally be scalloped out in a regular metal bed.
To standardize the whole shape of it.
Yeah. The other
Yeah,
interesting thing is that the back of the bed is not straight. It is angled like a Hyundai Santa Cruz bed. So that 6 foot long item may fit in the bed with the tailgate closed. But if it's
yeah.
boxy, maybe a 5 foot item would fit in the bed with the tailgate closed because it gets narrower as it goes to the top and then starts approaching that powered tonneau cover.
Right, and that sticks out above, the base of the bed by, about 6 at least 6 inches, maybe closer to a foot.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, if you're looking at that taller 6-foot item, it'd be tough. Tailgate down, I think it is basically just at 8 feet. So, for
Yeah.
your sheet goods, it'll make the cut. I also did get to see on the inside there, they have a pretty standard track running along there. So they've got some dividers, and that's actually, interestingly enough, that's where your
Hmm.
camping tent slides in, as it slots into the track and actually floats above the
Yeah.
the bed. It looks like it was paired pretty specifically to match their cargo totes that slide in right
Yeah.
under there. So
Hmm. So, to answer this particular question, the space is most likely not used for the air shocks because we know that there are other trucks out there with air suspensions, and we don't have that same level of intrusion in that area. So, unless Tesla has a very unusual air suspension design, there's no reason that that space would be needed there.
yeah,
Uh,
I'd be curious to know what's going on inside. Wasted space is not something we see a ton of with Teslas,
mhm.
so I would love to know more.
Yeah, the so many unanswered questions there. So let's move along here because we had a question that actually is right up the alley of what I was looking for here. We had the question here about Mini in Consumer Reports reliability, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull up 2 slides here while we talk about this, because this has been kind of interesting. So let's show. Let's see here. Pardon me, have to allow permission for Chrome to do its thing. And let's see if it actually will let me do this. Oh, I may have to actually close and reopen my streaming platform. So sorry about that, guys.
Oh.
Bad settings, my bad. Any rate, so I can pull them up on my iPad and show everybody while we talk about it. But essentially, in the latest Consumer Reports reliability metrics, Mini scored shockingly high on the metrics, and people were asking, why is this? And this leads us into a different conversation on reliability and some of the metrics out there. And I'm hoping that we can actually, in a future show, get my friend Michael Kresh, if he's watching, to actually come on the show and talk more about this. But if we take a look at the latest brand rankings, you can see there how they all stack up. Lexus obviously is at the top, just as you'd expect, Toyota, and then it's Mini. So the important thing to remember about Consumer Reports reliability is that it's based on member surveys. And the member surveys are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking over time. About 20 years ago, they were getting statistics on 1.3, 1.4 million cars a year. That number has gone all the way down to 330,000 cars approximately in this last survey. And only 70,000 of those cars approximately were in the about 3-year-old range. So actual useful data for future reliability predictions. Reliability on a 10-year-old car is interesting, but it's not going to tell you how your car you buy today is going to hold up.
Yeah, there's a lot of variance.
Then we have the reality that when you actually take a deeper dive into Consumer Reports data, there is a lot of missing data. So for instance, the Dodge brand, the only vehicle that this score represents for Dodge down there at number 21, which sounds logical for their positioning. Let me be perfectly frank. Dodge, probably less than average reliability. Let's just throw that out there. But that data is based only on the Durango. They sell 3 models in the US. That is based on one of them, and it's the least popular of the Dodges. Because if you're a Consumer Reports subscriber, you are probably interested in reliability. Therefore, you report your reliability. So you buy a Toyota, so you report your reliability, and it's this vicious circle. So it is actually not very surprising that Consumer Reports has a lot of data on the Japanese brands, less data on the Korean brands, even less data on the European and American brands. So, for instance, on the Mercedes side of things, they have no data on A-Class, E-Class, S-Class, GLS, EQE, GLC, GLS, CLA, or CLS. It's a huge number
and I'm pretty
of
sure
popular
Mercedes
models.
sold some of those in the last couple of years.
Pretty sure they sold some of those. E-Class is especially E-Class and S-Class, they're core products in their lineup there, and very surprising. Mini is missing Clubman. Chevy is missing Camaro, Trax, Malibu, Traverse, and Bolt. And Traverse is the second best-selling entry in its segment. So, there's some serious holes in this data, flaws one might even say. And the Mazda numbers don't include CX-9 or CX-90. Neither of those numbers are in there. Porsche is missing all the models in their lineup except for Cayenne and Macan. Those are the only ones that score represents. So, bearing in mind how these surveys work, it's very important to understand what the data is trying to tell us. The other thing that I would say people frequently get wrong and get all hot and bothered about is when we talk about consumer satisfaction surveys, is what I would rather call them, like the awkwardly named J.D. Power Initial Quality Study. This is probably the most divisive one here because, of course, on this survey, Dodge is number 1. And people take that to mean that J.D. Power is saying that Dodge is the most reliable brand in North America. That is absolutely not what this data tells us. This data tells us that in the first 90 days of ownership, The logos didn't fall off the car because the likelihood of anything else going wrong is very low on a new car. So your transmission did not fall out. It did not catch on fire. Your dealer paired your smartphone properly, and you like your car is the most important thing. So when people see these numbers, they say that's absolutely not believable. When you actually look at the numbers, though, it is very believable, because what does Dodge sell the majority of? Chargers and Challengers with big V8 engines. So you deliberately went there for that thing, and you're into it. You're down the Dodge rabbit hole.
You're not over it in the first 90 days. You're
Right.
still riding high.
Right. You didn't just go to the store and be like, I just want a toaster. Any toaster is fine. I just want to toast some toast. And you just like, that's the one. I bought a Sunbeam. Am I happy with the Sunbeam? I don't know. Right. This is the person that went in there and they're like, I must have this specific, whatever thing. Right.
I'm here for the Max Toast 3000.
Yeah. And so in these scores, it actually, I would say, makes sense, since it's, this mixture of did something go wrong, but also this like, did I like my car? Some brands will score lower on this because they're more commodity vehicles, and maybe the consumer is not overly invested in the brand and all of that. So you're just like, do I like my car? No, I don't like the way this button works or that button works, etc.
Yeah.
The one issue
I would data.
It's still data. Yeah, it's understanding the data.
Important.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the one thing I would say that I wish JD Power specifically would address, is renaming the stupid thing, because initial quality is weird. It's a weird thing to call it when a large portion of it is perceived quality, or things that have nothing to do with how the average human would describe quality. People think quality means reliability, and that is not what that survey is about. It would never tell you.
Super subjective.
Yeah.
How does this compare to this other vehicle? It's how do you like this one that you just went and bought in the first 90 days? People usually
it's a little odd. So that's those guys there. It is and the problem in a way is that the JD Power survey has a nicer, more broad data set than Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports data set's very insular. You have to subscribe, you have to be interested in it, then you get the survey. JD Power, they go about things in a more randomized fashion. They pull car registration data, they then anonymize it, and then they randomize it, and they throw out surveys to people out there, and then they get them to come back and fill the data out. So they actually do have data on all of these vehicles that are missing in the Consumer Reports survey. They just ask stupid questions.
The way you ask the survey in case,
right,
defines the results. So
yeah, and this guy makes a good point here, and this is sort of the interesting problem with like trying to go by your go ask your mechanic kind of a thing, or ask the forums kind of a thing, because people with problems collect in places. You have a problem with your car, what's the first thing you do? You Google, my Camry has a buzzing sound, and then it takes you to the Camry forum where your suspicions are confirmed. 10 people have a buzzing sound, and you're like, well, sure, but out of millions and millions and millions of Camrys around, how common is that actual problem?
Right.
Yeah. So it's like
it's both sides of the spectrum too, right? If there's an issue and you bought the Dodge and you're just looking for an issue, what defines an issue? What you bring in to the service bay that says, hey, I need attention on this. You might give it a pass with your Toyota or your Honda, but you said, oh no, these are super reliable. That isn't an issue.
Right. And so some of this is self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And here's the other thing that I would mention before we get bad comments later in the video or in the podcast that will come of this, is it's not that JD Power's data is radically different than Consumer Reports when you actually look at their reliability metrics. So in the third year of ownership, JD Power sends out another survey, and it's only in the third year is what that involves. So that one is it's the how do they call it? The VDS, the Vehicle Dependability Study. That one, however, there's a different flaw. Your transmission could have fallen out last year, but this year my car's been fine. So now you score really well on that chart, but it doesn't tell the consumer how reliable the car was in the average
The first
ownership
2
cycle
years.
because,
Yeah.
right, it excludes the first 2 years of ownership, which is mind-blowingly useless. Um,
Yeah.
so all these surveys have their own particular problem, and my big thing is customers need to educate themselves about what the survey and the results are saying rather than just take it as a blanket statement. And any car company can have a bad car and a bad year. For instance, Tundra
Yeah.
is actually one of the least reliable trucks you can buy in America, even according to Consumer Reports Insular data set. But problem with that, I would say, is they probably have much more data on Tundra problems, and they probably don't have nearly as many Silverados and F-150s and Rams in their data set. So if their data set was broader, maybe those would actually be worse than a Tundra.
Right. And we're not defending it saying, "Oh, no, it's not." We're saying it might not be as bad as it looks. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we're not big enough to run our own surveys and get all the
Hmm.
results, and we just have to work with what we have as well.
Yeah. The core tenet in any sort of research, any scientific endeavor, is understanding what you don't know, and that is a flaw with a lot of these metrics. Is that, the core answer really needs to be we don't know how some of these really are,
Yeah.
or what could make them better in a way.
Yeah,
So
and
with that,
until then, we do our best to educate along the way.
yep. So with that out of the way, let's move on to some viewer questions here. So Jay's asking us, is it worth upgrading from a 2020 CRV to a 2023 CRV? Have you been in the new CRV?
I spent a little time in the CRV. There were a couple auto shows in the last few weeks, and I went and poked around. I'll be honest, I have mixed feelings just aesthetically. I think when you look at things like the
Hmm.
interior, there are slight upgrades. I do like the way things are shaped and designed, but when it comes to the outside, it got bigger. Its shape changed pretty drastically. Um,
Hmm.
and unless there's something wrong with your 2020, or there was something you desperately need on a regular basis for that 23, I don't know if it is worth upgrading because they're pretty similar by and large.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. Rewinding just one moment, because this is a good question that Greg asks. Tundra market share is minuscule, but the reason that I don't have official data because Consumer Reports won't comment on their data set, but um, it's logical to assume that it's possible because the vast majority of Consumer Reports data set is Toyota and Honda, Mazda, and other Japanese brands, with then the next tier being Korean brands, and then last being American brands. So this is not a data set that is representative of the automotive buying public or of the average car on the road. This data set is representative of the people who buy, subscribe, and report to Consumer Reports. So
Yeah.
one of the important things in looking at statistics and research is understanding your data set and understanding what makes up your data set. Is it representative of the public or is it representative of a narrow demographic? And I would say Consumer Reports data is generally representative of a narrow demographic. They have admitted that in the past, and it's also obvious in their current data that you have vehicles that are in the top 2 or 3 best-selling positions in their segment, and they are missing them in their data. So, for instance, Consumer Reports last year rated the Dodge Charger, and actually this has been a consistent thing. They've rated the Dodge Charger the most reliable full-size sedan in America. And I don't believe that for a second. Just does not seem to hold water. But the reason is that their estimate is based on one model year over the last decade of production. That's all the data they have for the Charger. So it's it's kind of um, it's kind of skewed in that way. Uh, so here we go. So Jogbird, actually, this is actually a better point. JD Power has been misunderstood because of this particular side of their business. JD Power is a company that makes their money on doing research for companies. It's not a shakedown and it's not a purchased award. but it's much less useful to you as a consumer than it is to the car company buying the data. So companies will license the award. That doesn't matter at all because that's actually a very low budget item. They don't pay a lot to license the award. What they pay a lot for is the actual data that JD Power gets. And every car company in North America buys JD Power's data. And the reason here is JD Power can sell them a data set that goes through this randomized customer database, customers here, customers there, customers everywhere, and they can see how well the customer likes things. So if you've ever completed a JD Power survey on a new car, it's a fascinating experience because it's weird. And exactly, Greg, the companies wouldn't buy this data if they didn't think it was useful. And every car company buys the data. But the data is things like, do you like the shape of your rearview mirror? We recently actually filled out the survey for our long-term 2023 Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. So a video on that's going to come up at some point soon. But they literally ask you, do you like the shape of the mirror? How did the dealer treat you? Was this okay? Was that okay? Did they help you pair your smartphone? Was the software intuitive? Did the software reboot on you? Has it done these things? So as electronics in car have become more and more popular, the surveys have responded by asking more and more of these questions, which they then somehow jam into a quality index, which A, sounds weird, but B, is actually the data the car companies want. So this is kind of a circular logic thing. So car companies then build their cars incorporating this data. So there has been this claim that like the Koreans rocketed up the charts way too soon on initial quality. There's no way they could have improved quality this quickly. Well, the answer is yes, because Kia and Hyundai are the kind of company that will keep going back to the JD Power and consumer data and going, what has the customer complained about that we can fix easily? And so they design the cars to the test in a way. So they will go back time after time and say, what can we do to improve this score in that area? What can we do to improve that score in that area?
They've got the study guide. They're using
Yeah.
it.
Odd, depending on how you want to look at it, this results in a better product for you as a consumer, though. So let's move on to more questions because this is a good one here. Crazy Wee Monkey is doing Grand Highlander or Honda Pilot in response to this one here, who's looking for a 3-row under SUV for under $60,000. This is a good point. What would you pick? What strikes you as interesting in that segment?
So between the two, and I've sat in them, I've explored them, I haven't driven them. I was actually surprised with some of the space in the Pilot. Obviously, the Pilot is going to be smaller than the Grand Highlander, but I'm 6 feet tall. I am not a small person, and I was able to climb into the back, and I had room. And that I was pretty impressed with. I do like the way Honda lays things out a little bit better than Toyota. That's just kind of a personal feel for things. So I tend to like my vehicle smaller if I can help it. And I really was impressed. From the Highlander to the Grand Highlander, it is a little bit different experience, but obviously a very similar formula. I was pleasantly surprised where the Pilot fit in comparatively. If you're not using that third row on a very regular basis while also needing space for luggage, items, trips to the grocery store, that sort of thing, I think I'd steer towards the Pilot. I do really like the latest design on those. The Grand Highlander is attractive, but there's just a little bit of edginess in the Pilot, which is not something I would have said a couple years ago that I definitely enjoy.
Yeah, I would say some of it's going to depend on what you plan on using the third row for. So if you are still watching, you can go ahead and comment down there and we'll kind of run through it. But if you are using the third row regularly, especially for teens to young adults, that kind of range of ages and heights, you might be able to get away with a slightly smaller third row. If you're planning on putting adults occasionally back there, then I would say go towards Grand Highlander or Telluride or Palisade. Those have big third rows. I think it is interesting that that I like the Grand Highlander as much as I do, because I think actually it is a fantastic deal, especially the hybrid model. So you can get a hybrid Grand Highlander for only $1,200 more than the regular model. You will get over 35 miles per gallon if you treat it gently. And it's faster than the base turbo model, even though Toyota's numbers would say otherwise. In our testing, the hybrid was actually faster. And it has a huge cargo area in the back. Pilot, Pilot comes across as a little boring to me, and the screens are a little small. But my bigger problem for families, and this is more of a family thing, is in the Pilot, it's difficult to get into the third row if you have child seats in the second row. It's not easy in the Grand Highlander because the seats don't tilt and slide forward like you can in like a Grand Cherokee L or a Pathfinder or an Atlas, etc. But you in the Grand Highlander, you can slide the second row seat further forward with a child seat anchored into place. And that gets you easier into the third row. And the door opening is larger, so it's easier just to get back there into the rear. The Pilot has a nice 10-speed. I do like it better than the 8-speed in the Toyota. And of course, the Grand Highlander hybrid is gonna have a very different feel. So driving enjoyment, it's not the forte of that model. But I think it is telling that a lot of consumers have found regular Highlander and Pilot a bit too small, which is why we now see the rise of the Korean options. And for the first time ever, Kia is now number 3 in sales in the 3-row SUV segment. It's Traverse and then Explorer in top 1 and 2. I believe it's actually Explorer first, Traverse is number 2. It used to be Highlander, but now it is Telluride, and then Grand Highlander. Grand Highlander is probably going to get to number 3 here very soon. But Telluride has been beating the Honda Pilot at the sales wars for about 18 to 24 months now, because it is definitely
I won't say I'm
roomier
surprised by
inside.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a really great recipe. It's got a lot of the pieces that people are looking for, and just to be clear, I really do like the Grand Highlander as an entrant. It's, if I was comparing the two, they're not even quite comparable because that Grand Highlander is just a few percent more. What I appreciate is that vehicles like the Grand Highlander and like the Telluride are 3-row options that are not truck-based SUVs, and so you're skewing more towards the everyday friendly versus the super workhorse, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So Deborah's asking a question here for fleets. What would coworkers test drive to ease their EV concerns, such as distance and rural back roads and mountains? I would say we may not be there yet for this group of people. To be honest, there is not an EV solution for everybody today. That's not the world that we live in, unfortunately. But I would say also, unfortunately, there is a segment of people out there that use that as a cudgel to say that EVs will never work. Just because we haven't yet designed an EV for this segment of people doesn't mean that we can't. It just means that we haven't yet as a people. So I would say that for rural consumers that are interested in more off-road oriented vehicles, longer range vehicles, more towing and hauling oriented vehicles, the crop of American trucks that are coming out soon will probably be their best bet. So the next generation Lightning should probably be out in the next maybe 2 years would be my guess. We have the Silverado and the Sierra EVs, which are coming up. Hopefully GM will lower the price tag because they're wicked unaffordable right now. They're really expensive. And then we have the upcoming Ram EV and the Ram extended range plug-in hybrid. I think the Ram plug-in hybrid would probably be a solid, good step for a lot of folks interested, as long as they could afford one, and that really is the tricky bit. We haven't really seen too many companies work on honestly a lot of vehicles for normal people, for average people, everyday people, because that's not necessarily who buys new cars. Generally speaking, the wealthy people buy new cars. When you look at the average car buyer in America, it skews very heavily towards upper income earners rather. The average new car buyer today has about double the average national income household wise, is a single family home owner, and is suburban dwelling. So they're not buying cars that were designed for urban use. They're not buying cars that were designed for rural use either, because that's not their place in life. Um, and that is one thing I will say is sad. I find sad is that there are very few cars designed for first-time car buyers that are available new. If you're shopping for a brand new car today, it's going to be $25,000-$30,000 bare minimum for anything that is rational. Um, and that's not exactly an affordable first car price tag. You're probably going to buy used statistically. Um, Generally speaking, if you live in an apartment or you're a renter, you're probably statistically buying a used car as well today. And so it will be a
Well, the
while
challenge there
until
is you can't plug in your EV
yeah.
at your apartment in most
Hmm.
cases. So
Yeah, so it will be, and that is, I think, the bigger challenge in the EV world is not the first car buyer where we are currently fixated on this. The where does this car buyer
mhm,
charge? Because to sell to a Model Y today, that's becoming a bit more of a thing because the Model Y is very popular. But
mhm.
the average new car out there that's an electric vehicle, it's being bought by someone that has the ability to spend money on the charging infrastructure. If you're buying a $90,000 EV truck, then, and you can't afford a $1,000 home charger, well, boohoo, don't buy it. My heart is not bleeding for you. My problem is that person who has to buy it next and who needs to buy a
Yeah.
used car, and maybe they are looking at an EV, want an EV, have to buy an EV, whatever the reason is, but they live in an apartment and they can't charge. That is a problem.
I'm hopeful that we start seeing apartments adding that as an amenity, even if it's 110 charging, especially in higher density areas where your travel is going to be less distance and more around town. I think those 110 parking spots will go a long way. For
Mhm.
fleet use, though, it's nice to see that vehicles like the F-150 Lightning are there. The thing about fleet, not just vehicles, but fleet managers, is that they know exactly how far those vehicles run on a daily basis. And so, if you do find yourself in fleet cases and you are looking not only to
Mm.
save a couple bucks on maintenance, but also fueling, assuming that you have reasonable electricity in the area, I do think something like an F-150 Lightning is a good way to do it because it is
Mhm.
capable in ways that people expect their vehicles to be capable.
Yeah. Here's a good question. Do plug-in hybrids have higher fire risks than BEVs or ICE vehicles? This is an interesting one because one might logically
Yeah.
assume that the risk would be higher because it has a blend of both, but it appears by the data that we do have now, which is admittedly not a lot, that the hybrid or sorry, that fire danger risk is somewhere around the average ICE vehicle or slightly below. It's more in the hybrid space. So battery electric vehicles are less likely to catch on fire than gasoline vehicles. Data there has been skewed over time because of the very small number of EVs that are available. But as
Yeah.
EVs have grown to a larger share of the market, we are now seeing better data on this. And we see that EVs catch on fire on average less frequently than gasoline vehicles do. Um, as we start to see 20 or 30-year-old EVs, we don't know what the numbers will tell, but it's probably not going to be statistically different from these numbers here. Hybrid vehicles tend to catch on fire less than gasoline vehicles because things generally run cooler and they have smaller engines. And there's a bunch of different factors there into why hybrids catch on fire less frequently. But plug-in hybrids, there's a lot less data around because there just simply aren't as many. There are
Yeah.
far more EVs than plug-in hybrids, far more regular hybrids than plug-in hybrids. So some of this has to be extrapolated from a regular hybrid, uh, statistical model as far as likelihood of fires.
I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's one that a lot of people wonder just to varying degrees. But I do think at the core of it, the question is like, are batteries safe? And
Mhm.
if I may, the biggest issue is or happens to be a defect. It is not that this technology is unsafe. What you find is a
Mhm.
defect in production that creates this issue. So because there's a battery in it does not mean it's dangerous, does not mean it'll catch
Right.
fire. I pulled into a parking garage in Seattle just this week that said no Chevrolet Bolts are allowed to park in here. And it's
Hmm.
been a while since
Yeah.
that rollout was. And to be fair, I won't defend the fires as
Yeah.
no, they didn't happen. They did. It's important. There's a lot of data gathered.
Hmm.
Manufacturers are doing their very best to be very safe moving forward. Obviously, that's not what they want for their products, for their consumer to experience. However, it's
Yeah.
kind of a growing pain, and I think it is already in the way resolving itself. And obviously, we've seen a couple recalls recently. The 4xe is kind of the biggest one because it is the best selling
Hmm.
plug-in hybrid out there.
Yep.
Those got recalled, but some of that is, I think, being extra cautious, and that's a good thing. And recall doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's broken and your car is no longer going to function. It means they just need to go in and fix it, and recalls happen all the time.
Yeah. There is a for some reason there is a consumer perception that the more recalls a vehicle has, the worse it is. And that's not necessarily true because Toyota and Honda recall vehicles all the time. And the vast majority of recalls are not based on a consumer problem. They're based on manufacturers' own internal research. So if the manufacturer, they will
Yeah.
realize something went wrong, they institute a recall, etc. That's how usually it works. On the kind of tangential to this, I should actually also mention there is kind of a misconception about battery fires in EVs. Battery fires in EVs are harder to put out than gasoline or diesel fires, but they are not inherently more dangerous necessarily because it takes longer for them to start going. So you have, a really big, bad, wicked accident in a car,
Mhm.
the likelihood of explosion and you being unable to escape the car before it catches on fire is significantly higher in a regular
Yeah.
fossil fuel powered vehicle, significantly lower in a battery vehicle. And the amount of energy that is put off in terms of heat is significantly lower in a battery electric vehicle because there's less energy on board. So, one Tesla Model S holds the equivalent of maybe 2 to 3 gallons of gasoline. It's not a lot of energy. It's the problem is it just keeps burning and burning slowly for a long time and has the likelihood of reigniting when it's not when you're not paying attention to it. So different safety measures need to be employed, but it is not inherently more dangerous. It's that the danger is different and not everybody is accustomed to that level of danger.
And it makes a great headline, which is why we've seen it over and over and over again.
Hmm. Oh, here we
Yeah.
go. Drews, what this is a good theological discussion to have, I guess. What is your feeling on plug-in hybrids? I'm seeing quite a lot of journalists poo-poo on PHEVs. Um, I agree with this, and I have always been mystified by that. Plug-in hybrids make a lot of sense for me. Um, but I think you and I might have had this discussion earlier, Travis. So, and I
Yeah.
don't know how you fall on this side of the equation, but let's go explore. So, this is a conversation that I frequently have with journalists that are not necessarily even pro EV journalists, but it
Yeah.
goes like this. It's like, okay, I plugged in my plug-in hybrid battery and I drove 100 miles. I'm upset that my gasoline engine started when I floored the vehicle, or I'm upset when I climbed that hill and my gasoline engine had to start to climb the hill. It shouldn't have happened. The gasoline engine should have stayed off. Um, insert X, Y, or Z explanations. And my
Mhm.
question is, okay, what does it matter? You had to use the gasoline engine to drive 100 miles. What does it matter whether it turned on for 30 seconds here, a minute there, 30 seconds there, 5 minutes over there, then kicked it on in running for the last 40 miles, or whether it went all electric for X and then
Mhm.
did it? Like, you've used the same electricity and the same gasoline.
Yeah, I will only piggyback onto that because the conversation we had about plug-in hybrids is sort of their implementation. We just did a video on the Ram charger and
Hmm.
talked about some of the pros and cons of the serial design versus the parallel design. And while one of those is more efficient than the other, the way they've been implemented means that when you're going uphill
Hmm.
and you're in a standard plug-in hybrid, that electric power is not sufficient to get you up that hill because the electric power is such a smaller portion of the powertrain.
Yep. And
I tend to lean on and prefer the driving experience in something like
mhm,
the upcoming Ram Charger or the BMW i3 with the range extender because it is an electric driving experience. All the power that I'm pushing through is electric, going through electric motor,
mhm.
maximum regen, maximum torque. and then the power being fed into that motor is coming from the battery, which is connected to the engine. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's
Right.
so far that's how it's been implemented. I like plug-in hybrids. I think it's what most people should be switching to. I think it's also a great kind of a training wheels for switching to electric vehicles, because there's a lot of fear, and it's because of an unknown. What happens if I run out? Well, people don't run out of gasoline, and most people don't run out of electricity. It's almost difficult to do, more difficult these days than it was 10 years ago. And those batteries are so much smaller. We'll ignore the number for a second, but that Ram Charger has about half the size battery as the full
Yes.
electric truck, and that's significant. We're saving a lot of batteries. Batteries are not good. The creation of batteries, the materials that go into batteries, are not great for the environment. So if we can limit those, we're in a good spot. I just wish that more plug-in hybrids were more fun to drive in electric mode and weren't like the full eco experience, because then
Yeah.
you're missing less.
Right. And that's sort of, I guess, the ultimate question is, does a plug-in hybrid need to be more than a gasoline vehicle? Why can it not just be gasoline experience where part of your consumption has been shifted? So, and I think is where some people get hung up. And maybe there's obviously a use case for consumers that want that electric car feel. We'll see how well the Ram Charger does.
Yeah.
But there has not been an attempt outside the Fisker Karma to deliver that sort of experience in a way. And it is that ultimate question of, how does the consumer feel about harm reduction versus going cold turkey? And that is plug-in hybrid's mission, is reduction of consumption. But there's a lot of benefit to that. Like we were talking to my sister-in-law recently. She lives in Chicago, and she was really torn about which van to get. So she wanted a minivan. Which van should she get? She was unsure about the plug-in hybrid kind of thing. We said, well, the plug-in hybrid has one benefit that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, and that's visiting the gas station less. So, if you are, and some people will say, well, they have the trouble of plugging it in. It's like, yeah, but if you spend 5 seconds here every day plugging it in, but then you don't
At a
have to go
place you
out of
wanted
your
to
way.
be.
Right, a place
Yeah.
you theoretically are anyway. And then you don't go to the gas station nearly as often. It really means that you can stretch that not only reduce the cost, but also stretch out that inconvenience.
Yeah. So at my house, just for the record, we got a plug-in hybrid and a full electric, and the full electric is what we use for our longer trips. So when we're going out of town, or I'm to and from the airport quite a bit, and it's 100 miles back and forth, so I'm using up that battery. But for the commutes into town, that 25-ish miles on the plug-in hybrid is perfect. But I couldn't justify 2 battery electrics because it's a lot of battery that wouldn't be getting used on a regular basis. But we'll always use the battery in the plug-in hybrid.
So here's a good sort of engineering question. Why do we not have diesel plug-in hybrids? This one is a bit complicated. There are some diesel hybrids and plug-in hybrids around the world, just not here. But diesels have some particular challenges. The most critical one with the American market would be the perception of diesel. The second most critical component would be the cost of a diesel plug-in hybrid. So you already have the cost of a plug-in hybrid system, then you have the incrementally higher costs of having a diesel engine versus a gasoline engine. It's going to be more expensive. And then you have the weight on board in the diesel emissions mitigation systems. So the urea injection, et cetera, is going to be required. On an engineering level, it ends up being a little bit trickier because with diesel engines, getting them up to operating temperature takes longer because they run cooler than a gasoline engine, and you need to be able to get the soot particulate filters up to the right temperature rapidly for the emissions control systems to function, to start reducing nitrous oxide emissions, which are not great. You really don't want nitrous oxide, at this level of the atmosphere. Not necessary. So there are definitely challenges with that. So a diesel plug-in hybrid would have to run the diesel probably a lot more than a gasoline hybrid would. And this
Which
is
is
why
counter to the whole idea.
it's kind of counter to the whole thing. And they could still generate power during that time, but all of that together just presents some additional challenges that don't necessarily exist in that same way with the gasoline plug-in hybrid.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's it's implemented in trains. That's one of the biggest.
yeah.
We use them in
Hmm.
these in locomotion. That's going to happen more, right? They're putting a
Hmm.
lot more miles. They're a
Right.
lot longer run time. So you run into it. If you look at the numbers, you could say yes, this would be more efficient because diesel's super efficient, and they make grid generators, and
Hmm.
these are all true. But there's enough hurdles that says, okay, if we look at those numbers, build a vehicle off of it, who's buying it because it's more expensive, and how much more are you really getting out of it, and it's heavier when you're not using it. And yeah,
Yeah.
in an ideal world maybe, but
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And then there's just getting consumers to buy it. That's the other
yeah,
tricky thing. But the diesel locomotive thing brings up an interesting point because this is something that's commonly cited as well. Why don't we have more serial hybrids? They do it in diesel locomotives. It's a thing, and that is definitely true. They do a lot of serial hybrids in diesel locomotives. But if you look at this on a technical level, it would be more difficult to achieve, but technically it would be more efficient for a diesel locomotive to be a parallel hybrid, not a serial hybrid. It just would. So anytime you are generating electricity and then moving that electricity to a motor rather than just driving the wheels mechanically, it is going to be less efficient in a car, which is
yeah,
why,
you're just building
for
in loss.
right. That's why, for instance, the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid that we have is so low on the efficiency scale compared to other similarly sized and similarly powerful hybrids and plug-in hybrids. It's definitely a problem efficiency-wise. There are some benefits because you can have high torque, which is part of why they do it in diesel electric applications. So you can have a huge amount of torque from the electric motors, and you're essentially trading, it's kind of a weird way to say it, but you can think of it as trading horsepower for torque in this process. That's one of the benefits of a serial hybrid system like that. Um,
Yeah,
but it is not necessarily efficient, which is part of why we have not seen the Nissan, hybrid system come to the U.S. The way those hybrid systems are rated as far as fuel economy in Europe is very advantageous for that style of hybrid, but it's a bit of a problem when you even go the very easy EPA testing route, which is not overly realistic.
yeah.
So let's see here. Moving on here. What other questions have we that we should answer? Oh, someone was asking about a base model Prius, and then they were talking about the Camry as well in this thought process. What do you think of the new Prius? I really like its design, I have to say.
I really like the shape of it. I I was disappointed by the interior, and it's kind of the interior layout.
Mm,
It did get a little bit smaller as far as some of your your cargo space. It's a little bit more of a lift back than a hatchback now. Not totally so, but
yeah,
it did change shape. The problem for me, and I don't know if it's just me, is the driving position because of the way they have your dash laid out. You are now meant to look at this display over the wheel instead of through the wheel,
yes,
which for me means I have to lower the wheel, which puts it much closer to my legs, which makes it harder to get in and out of. I can find an okay driving position, but I
yeah,
almost feel like I'm in a roller coaster, kind of strapping myself in uh, with the steering wheel, and I was disappointed because there's a lot that I like about
yeah.
it. If it, it's something. If I spend a week with it, I'll be able to tell you if it did or didn't get in the way. But I was a little disappointed. If that isn't a problem, and again, I'd love to test it out. I just haven't at this point. I would probably go towards the Prius, but nothing against the Camry.
Mhm. The Camry's fuel efficiency is pretty impressive. I will say that the extra power that we get in the Prius has reduced its real world fuel economy, and you will notice it. Um, you're not going to notice it in your pocketbook. You'll notice it by the number because the difference between
Mhm.
40 and 45 mpg is really small as far as the gas you use. But part of me is a little bit sad that it went a tiny bit backwards on that front. What are your thoughts on a used Model 3 versus a Polestar 2? You were just in the Polestar 2 BST, whatever it's called.
The BST, yeah.
There's a B, there's an
Honestly,
S, and there's a T in there. Oh,
Are
we know.
we? There's still going to be a significant cost difference. Obviously, the gap gets smaller between the three
Mhm.
and the two, as it were. Um, but the three's got more space inside. That is worth noting, and it is still going to be a lot easier to charge if you're on the road on a more regular basis. I really do like the Polestar 2. I like that it's a lift back. It's actually pretty easy to get into because of the ride height of it. Right, it's got a little more clearance,
Mhm.
and it's the superior driver of the two. I have the Model 3. We were, like you said, we were in the Polestar
Mhm.
2. If I could trade it for a couple weeks, I'd say absolutely give me that Polestar 2. And they said, which one do you want to take home? I'd probably go back to my Model 3.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, the Model 3 is roomier. So that is, one consideration because remember the Polestar 2 is a subcompact car platform. So
Yeah.
it is a little tight in the back seat. Um, Driving enjoyment again, I agree I would go Polestar 2, but I will say that they have made significant improvements over time. So if you're looking at a used one, you don't get some of those improvements. You don't get the more
Mm.
powerful rear motor now and the greater efficiency, et cetera. So, depending on how used, I think that would be an interesting question there.
The other thing
Um,
I will add is that as we get more charging on the road and that becomes less of a factor, that would steer me closer to that Polestar
mhm,
2. It's just I know how often I stop and supercharge to and from airports and running around,
yep,
and it it's not inconvenient to me as it is, but it could become so if I had to search more.
yep. So this actually is a good idea, Drew. We have talked about that, so who knows what the future will hold for us. Um, Moving along here, there's someone was asking about new Tucson hybrid or Honda CRV hybrid. I honestly would go Tucson hybrid or Sportage mainly because of the fuel economy. Fuel economy in the CRV hybrid has been pretty disappointing in this generation, and it's because of what we were just talking about earlier. The Honda CRV hybrid is a serial hybrid only below about 45 miles an hour. So if you're doing a lot of city driving or a lot of hill climbing, it's going to have lower fuel economy versus the Tucson. But also conversely, if you live in a state with a higher speed limit, so if you are routinely going 70 miles an hour or over, then you'll notice a significant fuel economy benefit to the Tucson hybrid. The Honda CRV hybrid can only connect one fixed gear ratio between the engine and the wheels, and it starts at around 45 miles an hour. And then by the time you're at around 65 miles an hour, the engine's spinning pretty quick, and you're way out of the peak efficiency bell curve of the engine. By the time you're going 75 miles an hour, the fuel economy actually can be a little bit worse than a regular CRV without the hybrid system. So your driving situation definitely should be taken into account there.
Well, and unfortunately, it's not going to show up in the EPA numbers. I will also say I spent some time in the Tucson as well, and that's a nice machine. They've got some niceties in there
Hmm.
that you're not going to find in the CRV. It's a very different space. It
Hmm.
is a little more modern in its own way. So between those two, I would lean toward the Tucson as well.
I'm not thrilled with the front end design on the Tucson. It is definitely a acquired taste.
So far, I've acquired it.
So what's prettier, Sportage or Tucson?
Prettier. The
Because
Sportage is probably
I
prettier, but
ooh really?
the I
Um,
think so.
I think the Sportage. I don't know. It has a face that only a mother could love.
Hmm.
I like the Sportage plug-in hybrid. It's a great car, great to drive. Interestingly, it was the second most reliable car in this latest Consumer Reports study. Actually, the Sportage plug-in hybrid scored very well. Um, but the front end, oh
I
my.
it's simpler. So I think there's something to that. If you just look at that whole body, it's simpler than the
Hmm.
Tucson. But there's a flavor for each.
Ah, this is actually a good one here. So tasty niblets with a dog apparently as an icon. So fun there. Um, Forrester's getting a hybrid soon. We actually know a little bit about this already because they have already said it is a Toyota hybrid, and they've already said it will be a Toyota hybrid with a Boxer engine. So basically, this is going to be a not plug-in version of the Crosstrex hybrid system in the Forester. And so what that means is that it's going to be using the same electric motor generator units and same planetary power split device as Toyota's hybrid systems, but they're going to be borrowing the newest generation from the 2.5-liter turbo, 2.5-liter regular non-turbo hybrid Toyotas, but jammed into a rear-wheel drive longitudinal transmission case, because all of Subaru's vehicles use longitudinal engines longitudinal engines and longitudinal transmissions rather than transverse. We don't know any details, actual hard details on it, but we know that the platform was not designed for a transverse engine. We know that it's going to use a boxer engine and it's going to be a Toyota hybrid. So all of those pieces together basically point us to the same direction that we were in before. So 2-motor planetary power split system coupled to the same mechanical all-wheel drive system that we find existing in the Subaru lineup. So it's going to be kind of a hybrid of hybrids, I guess, if you will. And it's going to be using, as in the last generation, it's most likely going to be using off-the-shelf Toyota components. So the battery will be shared with some Toyota model, which one we don't know, probably the Camry or Crown or something like that. And then the motors, most likely Camry or Crown or Highlander in that mix as well, as far as the capability and power output.
Yeah, I was there for the 2025 release of the first look at the Forester, and they said hybrid coming soon, and then that was it, because they didn't have a lot more to share at the time. Like you said, we've got some basic idea. Honestly, it's 2 pretty good parts bins to be pulling from to put the system together. So overall, looking forward to see what that improvement is in something like fuel economy and maybe a little bit of performance on the low end torque end of things, but we'll have to wait a little bit longer.
My personal suspicion is that the fuel economy should probably end up somewhere along the lines of the Escape hybrid, because the design is going to be very similar to the Escape in that it uses the planetary power split system like Toyota does, but with a mechanical all-wheel drive system, which is probably going to lower the fuel economy a bit versus the e-axle in the RAV4, but it should be pretty decent.
I think people will be excited for it. I mean, it's when you look at the Forester buyer, they like things that make sense, and a more fuel efficient Forester makes sense. So
yeah. So a lot of folks were asking here about the Cadillac XT6, some of the new GM products. I have not seen the new Equinox in person yet. So we only have some rumors and leaked photos and things like that showing off some of the angles. It kind of sort of looks a little bit like the Equinox EV, but not exactly. And then we don't have any detail yet really on the upcoming Buick and Cadillac full-size crossovers. So they're corollary to the Acadia and the Traverse, but we should be getting those pretty soon. Apparently, we will be driving the Acadia or Traverse sometime in the early spring of 2024. So that's the most likely target time around there.
that's not too far off.
This is a good one. Any rumors of other plug-in hybrids other than the TX and the Ram Charger coming soon? We know that there's going to be a CRV fuel cell plug-in hybrid. They haven't given us too many details on that one just yet, but we know that's coming.
Well,
we know that
maybe coming to California. I don't think I'll see it here.
we know that there are going to be some plug-in hybrid Toyotas because they are not done with the Prime lineup. So we know that there will be more. We don't know which ones though. I would not be surprised if we got a plug-in hybrid Crown at some point. That seems to be the right one for the picking. The Lexus RX plug-in hybrid recently went on sale as well, so that's added to the bunch. And we probably will get a plug-in hybrid Ford Ranger. That seems very likely. Most likely, there's also going to be a plug-in hybrid Wagoneer. So likely the same battery extending system as the Ram Charger. And there's probably also going to be a plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee L that will use the 4xe system from the regular Grand Cherokee. But other than that, there are some brands that seem to be running away from the plug-in hybrids, and some brands that have models here and there that are not brought to the US. So it does not appear that we're going to see any more Audi plug-in hybrids. But we most likely will see some additional BMW plug-in hybrids, just reiterations of the same lineup that currently has a plug-in hybrid system. And the Jaguar Land Rover lineup, they're definitely in on the plug-ins.
Yeah, like you said, the not just Audi. I had an Audi plug-in hybrid and loved it. They've got systems in Europe that we just don't see here. Volkswagen also is leaning heavy into electric instead of that mix. You also don't see much in the Chevy lineup, in the Honda lineup. There's quite a few missing pieces, but they trickle out more and more. So
yeah. Someone's here is asking, should I get the 24 or wait for the 25 RAV4? I am going to be interested to see what changes. The rumor mills that I have been hearing is that the RAV4 is going to be more of a moderate refresh rather than a complete redesign, which makes sense because it's not that old,
yeah,
generally speaking. It's turning 6 though soon, so it may be somewhere between a full redesign and a solid refresh. I would expect the dimensions to not change much, but the style will probably move forward in a direction either similar to the Grand Highlander or some blend of Grand Highlander and Toyota Tacoma, maybe on the front end look, because that's kind of the inspiration
yeah.
for the current RAV4.
Some bumper finishes, maybe some interior
Yeah.
touches, but
Most of the rumors have circled around redesigned hybrid system with a bit more power. The hybrid system is going to be more available or standard in some trims rather than being more optional like it is now. And then a bit more of a focus on a prime version. So that seems to be what we may get. And with that, I think we should call it a night. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see all of you next week.
have a good one.